What could be the reason that even though America is the largest oil producer in the world, it still can't fully use its own oil whenever it wants? It's almost like a farmer who grows crops on his own land but has to bow before someone else just to consume that harvest. The world we live in often shows one reality on the surface and hides another behind it. Every year, millions of containers travel from China to the United States. But why does America end up stacking so many of those containers like scrap? And in the middle of all this, how did Iran manage to move Boeing 777 aircraft across the world right in front of everyone despite heavy sanctions? In today's episode, let's break it all down. Across the oceans, millions of ships are moving at this very moment. Nearly 90% of the global economy depends on maritime trade. Thousands of massive container ships cross vast seas, each carrying thousands of steel boxes. The clothes you wear, the phone in your hand, at some point they were inside one of those containers. From a distance, it looks simple. Containers arrive full and return empty in a perfectly balanced system. But in reality, there's a deep imbalance hidden in this flow. Over the past few decades, China has become the factory of the world. Massive exports and relatively limited imports have built an enormous trade empire. When these stacks of containers reach ports in Europe or the United States, that's where the problem begins. Compared to China, Europe's overall trade surplus is much smaller. In America's case, the picture is even more dramatic. As the world's largest consumer market, the US imports heavily but exports far less. About 40% of the containers arriving from China go back filled with goods. But what happens to the rest? It's not that all of them return empty. Shipping an empty container back to China costs around $3,000 and takes up valuable cargo space. A full container can generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in value. China can manufacture a brand new container for about $2,000, so there's little incentive to ship old ones back. As a result, millions of new containers are produced every year, while countless old ones sit rusting near ports in cities. Some are repurposed into cheap storage units or small homes. Some are melted down for steel. But a huge portion remains unused, silent, rusting monuments to global trade imbalance. On the other side of this global system lies America's oil paradox. The US is now the world's largest oil producer, yet it cannot fully rely on its own crude. The first reason is the nature of the oil itself. Much of the oil extracted in the United States is light crude, thin and less dense. However, many American refineries were built decades ago to process heavier crude oil, imported from countries like Mexico and Venezuela. Retrofitting these refineries to efficiently process light crude would require over $200 billion in investment, something that cannot happen overnight. So the US often exports its light crude at higher prices and imports heavier crude at lower prices to match its refining infrastructure. The second reason is infrastructure. Oil fields are not always located near the refineries that need them. Even though Texas holds vast oil reserves, there aren't enough pipelines to transport that oil efficiently to refineries on the East Coast. In California, limited pipeline infrastructure means nearly 70% of fuel consumption depends on imports. So even with oil beneath its soil, the system prevents it from reaching the right place at the right time. Now, turn to the politics of sanctions. Iran has lived under strict US sanctions for years, restricted from purchasing American aircraft or parts. Yet Iran's private airline, often referred to as Great, operates multiple American Boeing and European Airbus jets. How is that possible? In 2024 and 2025, reports showed that 5 Boeing 777 aircraft suddenly ended up in Iran's hands. These planes had previously belonged to Singapore Airlines and were parked long-term in the Australian desert. Iran couldn't buy them directly due to sanctions. So first, a US-based company purchased the aircraft. On paper, they were then sold to companies registered in Madagascar and Cambodia, entities that reportedly had no real operational presence. The transactions were structured to avoid direct links to Iran. Once the aircraft were transferred under foreign registrations, they moved beyond direct US jurisdiction. Officially filed for maintenance and routed towards Kenya, The planes reportedly switched off their transponders after entering Afghan airspace, disappearing from radar before ultimately landing in Iran. By the time authorities pieced it together, the jets had already joined Iran's fleet. Legally, proving direct violation became complicated because Iran's name never appeared in the transaction documents. These stories remind us how fragile and complex the global economic system truly is. Decisions made oceans away ripple into everyday life: fuel prices, supply disruptions, airline fleets, supply chains. The next time you hear about rising oil prices or supply disruptions, remember, behind those headlines are ships crossing oceans, legal loopholes, infrastructure gaps, and geopolitical chess moves that shape the world we all share.